Exactly 11:47 p.m. on the evening of August 24th, 2026, a secure document was delivered to the offices of the King's private secretary at Clarence House. The document bore the seal of the Prince of Wales's private office and was marked "Immediate execution, wise only." It contained a series of legally binding orders that had been drafted over the preceding 48 hours by a team of palace lawyers working under the direct instruction of Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales. The orders did not request permission. They did not seek consultation. They simply directed that Queen Camilla's administrative privileges, her access to royal property, and her oversight of certain charitable foundations would be terminated with immediate effect. The orders were signed by both William and Catherine, a joint authorization that was unprecedented in modern royal history. When the document reached the King's private secretary, he woke the King at 12:15 a.m. to deliver the news. Charles, still groggy from sleep, read the document in his dressing gown, sitting on the edge of his bed. His expression, according to a source who witnessed the moment, shifted from confusion to disbelief to stunned silence. He had not been consulted. He had not been warned. His son and daughter-in-law had acted without his knowledge or consent, and they had done so in the middle of the night. The King sat in the darkness for nearly an hour, staring at the document, unable to process what had just happened. His wife's future had been decided without him, and the decision had been made by the very people he had trusted to carry the monarchy forward after he was gone. Before we trace exactly how this unprecedented late-night power play unfolded, take a moment to subscribe. There are layers to this story that the mainstream press has not yet touched, and the orders that William and Catherine executed contain provisions that will force every constitutional expert to reconsider the balance of power within the monarchy. The document that was delivered in the middle of the night did not just strip Camilla of her administrative privileges, it fundamentally redefined the relationship between the sovereign, the heir, and the consort in ways that had never been attempted in British history. But to understand why the Prince and Princess of Wales acted now, why they bypassed the King entirely, and why Camilla's future has been plunged into uncertainty, we need to go back to a private conversation that took place at Adelaide Cottage on the evening of August 20th, 2026, a conversation in which Catherine made a discovery that would change everything she and William thought they knew about the direction of the monarchy. The discovery was not dramatic in the traditional sense. It was not a hidden document uncovered in a vault, nor was it a secret recording or a whispered confession from a disgruntled court. It was a simple observation that Catherine had made while reviewing the household accounts for an upcoming charity event, a routine task that she had performed many times before without incident. She had been looking at the allocation of funds for the annual Trooping the Colour ceremony, which required meticulous financial planning and coordination across multiple departments within the royal household. But this time, something caught her eye that she had never noticed before. A significant portion of the budget had been redirected to a new initiative that was being run by Queen Camilla's private office, an initiative that had not been discussed in any of the regular budget meetings that Catherine had attended. The initiative was described as a modernisation programme for the royal household, but the details were vague, the costs were exorbitant, and the approval process had been conspicuously absent from the usual administrative channels. Catherine asked for more information, and what she found was alarming enough to warrant an immediate meeting with her husband. The initiative was not a modernisation programme at all, as Catherine would soon discover. It was a series of administrative changes designed to consolidate power in Camilla's office. Changes that had been approved without the knowledge of the Prince of Wales's office, without the consultation of the royal trustees, and without any formal oversight from the King himself. The changes included the reassignment of key staff members from William's office to Camilla's, the redirection of funds from established charitable programs to new initiatives that were controlled exclusively by Camilla's private secretary, and the creation of a parallel administrative structure that operated outside the usual palace governance protocols. What made the discovery even more troubling was the timeline. These changes had been implemented gradually over a period of 6 months, each one small enough to escape notice individually, but collectively representing a significant shift in the balance of power within the household. Camilla had been building an administrative empire without anyone noticing, and she had been doing so with the quiet complicity of senior courtiers who had been persuaded that her expanded role was in the best interests of the monarchy. Catherine brought the discovery to William's attention that evening, laying out the documents on the dining table at Adelaide Cottage in the same methodical way she approached all her work. He examined the papers with the careful eye of someone who had been trained to spot irregularities, someone who had spent years studying the inner workings of the institution he was born to lead. What he found was more concerning than Catherine had initially realised. The administrative changes were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern that stretched back more than 6 months, a pattern that suggested a deliberate and coordinated effort to expand Camilla's authority at the expense of the changes had been implemented quietly, without consultation, and without any formal approval from the king or the royal trustees. William recognised the tactics immediately. They were the same tactics that had been used in the 1990s to marginalise his mother, the same slow, steady erosion of authority that had left Diana isolated and powerless. The realisation hit him like a physical blow, and he sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. William and Catherine spent the following days gathering more evidence, working late into the night to piece together the full extent of Camilla's administrative expansion. They contacted the Crown Estate's Administrative Division, which provided them with additional records that confirmed their suspicions. They consulted with palace lawyers, who confirmed that the changes were technically legal but constitutionally questionable, operating in a grey area that had never been properly tested. The lawyers also confirmed that the king had not been informed of the full extent of the changes, and that Camilla's office had been operating with a degree of autonomy that was unprecedented in modern royal history. The situation was, in the lawyers' view, a potential constitutional crisis waiting to happen, a crisis that could erupt at any moment if the public ever learned that the Queen Consort had been running a parallel administrative structure without proper oversight. William and Catherine now had a choice. They could wait and hope that the situation would resolve itself, or they could act decisively to protect the institution they would one day inherit. The discovery was a turning point in William and Catherine's relationship with the institution. William had been prepared to accept that Camilla's removal from active duties was a matter of administrative necessity, a painful but necessary step to restore balance to the household. But the administrative changes suggested something far more troubling, a systematic pattern of behaviour that went beyond mere ambition and entered the realm of institutional subversion. Camilla had not just been seeking power for herself, she had been actively undermining the authority of the heir's office, creating a parallel structure that would allow her to maintain influence even after she had been removed from public duties. The implications were profound and deeply disturbing. If the public learned that the Queen Consort had been operating outside the palace's governance structure, the damage to the monarchy would be catastrophic, potentially triggering a constitutional crisis that could threaten the very existence of the institution. William and Catherine made a decision that would change the course of royal history. They would not confront Camilla directly, as that would only create more drama and give her an opportunity to defend herself. They would not leak the information to the press, as that would undermine the public's trust in the institution. Instead, they would act decisively, using their authority as the heirs to the throne to impose the necessary changes without seeking permission from anyone. The orders were drafted on August 22nd and August 23rd, a painstaking process that involved multiple revisions and consultations with palace lawyers who confirmed that the orders were legally sound and constitutionally defensible. The orders were then presented to William and Catherine for signature on August 24th, and both signed without hesitation, authorising the immediate termination of Camilla's administrative privileges, her access to royal property, and her oversight of certain charitable foundations. Prince and Princess of Wales had drawn a line in the sand, and they were not going to let anyone cross it. The orders were executed at precisely midnight, a deliberate choice that was intended to minimise the opportunity for interference or last-minute appeals. By the time the king was informed, the orders had already been processed and implemented. Camilla's access to the palace's administrative systems had been revoked. Her staff had been instructed to report to the Prince of Wales's office, and her oversight of the charitable foundations had been transferred to Catherine's office. The changes were immediate and irreversible, and there was no going back. The palace staff who had been working in Camilla's office were shocked by the suddenness of the changes, but they complied without resistance, understanding that the authority of the Prince of Wales was not something to be questioned. The midnight executions were swift, comprehensive, and devastatingly effective. By the time the sun rose over London on August 25th, Camilla's administrative empire had been dismantled completely. The king's reaction to the orders was described by a source as one of profound shock, followed by a deep and unsettling silence. Charles had not anticipated that his son and daughter-in-law would act without consulting him, and he had certainly not anticipated that they would act in the middle of the night, bypassing all the usual channels of communication and consultation. He had assumed that they would come to him first, seeking his approval for any significant changes, and he had prepared himself for a measured debate about the future of the consort's role. The fact that they had bypassed him entirely was a direct challenge to his authority, a challenge that left him reeling and uncertain about how to respond. He sat in his dressing gown, reading and rereading the document, trying to find some legal or constitutional flaw that would allow him to reverse the changes. But the document was airtight, drafted with the precision of lawyers who had anticipated every possible objection. Charles had been outmaneuvered by his own son, and he was struggling to come to terms with the implications. The following morning, the king summoned William and Catherine to Clarence House for an emergency meeting that would determine the future of the monarchy. The meeting was described by a participant as tense and difficult, the kind of conversation that defines relationships for a generation. Charles demanded to know why they had acted without his knowledge, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. William responded calmly, presenting the evidence that had led to their decision with the measured precision of a man who had prepared for every possible argument. He showed his father the administrative changes that Camilla's office had implemented, the lack of transparency, the potential constitutional risks, and the pattern of behaviour that suggested a deliberate effort to subvert the authority of the heir's office. Charles listened in silence, his expression gradually shifting from anger to concern, and then to something approaching resignation. He had not known the full extent of his wife's activities, and the revelation was deeply troubling. William then delivered the final blow that would change everything. He told his father that he and Catherine had lost all confidence in Camilla's ability to manage the administrative functions of the monarchy, and that they believed her continued involvement posed a direct threat to the stability of the institution. He said that the Queen Consort had consistently overstepped her authority, that she had surrounded herself with advisers who were more loyal to her than to the monarchy, and that the time had come to draw a clear and permanent line between the consort ceremonial role and the administrative functions of the household. He concluded by saying that the orders were not a request for approval, they were a statement of fact. The changes had already been implemented, they were not going to be reversed, and Charles would have to accept the new reality. The Prince of Wales had spoken with the authority of a future king, and his words carried the weight of an institution that could no longer tolerate ambiguity. Charles's response was described by a source as quiet but firm, the voice of a sovereign who had been backed into a corner. He said that he understood his son's concerns and that he appreciated the evidence that had been presented, but he could not accept the way they had been addressed. He said that the monarchy was built on trust and consultation, not on unilateral action, and that the manner of the execution had undermined the very principles they were trying to protect. He asked William to reconsider, to rescind the orders and allow for a more measured approach that would preserve the dignity of the institution and the family. William refused, stating that the situation required urgency, not delay, and that any further delay would only allow Camilla to rebuild her administrative network. The meeting ended without resolution, with the king and his heir fundamentally at odds, each believing that they were acting in the best interests of the monarchy. The public learned of the orders when the story was leaked to The Guardian on August 26th, a leak that was almost certainly from within the king's circle, designed to generate sympathy for the monarch and to portray William and Catherine as overreaching and ruthless. The Guardian's exclusive was headlined, "Prince William strips Camilla of powers in Midnight Palace coup," and it detailed the orders, the timeline, and the king's stunned reaction in dramatic and unsparing detail. The article painted William and Catherine as ambitious and unyielding, willing to humiliate the king and his wife in pursuit of their vision for the monarchy. The public reaction was immediate and intense, with social media erupting in a storm of speculation and debate about the future of the institution and the family at its centre. Constitutional historians were wheeled onto television news programmes to explain the significance of the orders, and their analysis was uniformly grey. The consensus was that William and Catherine had acted within their constitutional rights, but that the manner of their action was unprecedented in modern royal history. The heir had never before unilaterally stripped the consort of her powers, and the joint authorization by William and Catherine was a sign that the monarchy was entering uncharted constitutional territory. The historians noted that the orders had established a new precedent, The consort's role was no longer secure, and the heir's authority could now be exercised without the sovereign's consent. The implications were profound, and they would be debated for generations to come.
The public reaction to the orders was divided along predictable lines, with each side deploying its own narratives and arguments. Some commentators praised William and Catherine for acting decisively to protect the institution, arguing that Camilla had been given every opportunity to prove herself and had consistently failed to respect the boundaries of her role. Others criticized them for overstepping their authority and for humiliating the king, arguing that the manner of the execution was vindictive and unnecessary. The debate was replicated on social media, where hashtags like #TeamWilliam and #JusticeForCamilla battled for dominance, each side convinced of the righteousness of its position. The palace was caught in the crossfire, unable to control the narrative and unwilling to choose a side, leaving the public to draw its own conclusions from the limited information that was available. William and Catherine, meanwhile, conducted their public duties with their characteristic composure, appearing at events as though nothing had changed. They attended a school opening in East London, a hospital visit in Manchester, and a reception for Commonwealth diplomats at Buckingham Palace, smiling, shaking hands, and performing their roles with the professionalism that had come to define their public image. They did not comment on the orders, and they did not mention Camilla by name, maintaining a disciplined silence that frustrated the press but demonstrated their commitment to the institution. Their silence was a strategic choice, designed to allow the story to fade from the headlines without giving it additional fuel. They had already made their point, and they did not need to make it again. The long-term implications of the orders are still unfolding, and they will shape the monarchy for generations to come. The termination of Camilla's administrative privileges has created a new dynamic within the palace, one in which the consort's role is clearly defined and limited. Her staff have been reassigned to other departments. Her budget has been reduced to a fraction of its previous size, and her influence has been all but eliminated from the administrative functions of the household. She is still the Queen Consort, and she still holds her ceremonial title, but she is no longer the administrative power she once was. The changes have been swift and comprehensive, and there is no indication that they will be reversed. The public reaction to the orders has been overwhelmingly supportive of William and Catherine, according to recent opinion polls. Their approval ratings have risen even further, while Camilla's have declined to record lows, reflecting the public's belief that the Prince and Princess of Wales acted in the best interests of the institution. The public sees them as the defenders of the monarchy's integrity, the guardians of its future, and the leaders who will restore trust in an institution that has been damaged by years of internal conflict. Camilla, by contrast, is now seen as a figure who overreached and was finally held accountable, a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition in a rigidly hierarchical institution. The king's relationship with his son and daughter-in-law has been strained by the orders, and it may never fully. Charles had hoped to manage the transition more gently, to ease Camilla out of her administrative role while preserving her dignity and protecting the public perception of the family. But William and Catherine's decisive action has left him in an uncomfortable position, caught between his loyalty to his wife and his duty to the institution. He is still the king, but his authority has been challenged by his own heir, and the challenge has been successful. The balance of power within the family has shifted, and it will not shift back. Camilla, who has been at Ray Mill House since the orders were executed, is reportedly devastated by the changes, according to sources close to her. She had built her administrative empire over years, carefully cultivating relationships with senior courtiers and expanding her authority one small step at a time. The empire has been dismantled in a matter of days, and the woman who once believed she would be the power behind the throne is now a figure on the margins, isolated from the institution she had tried to reshape. Her allies have been reassigned, her access has been revoked, and her future is uncertain. The Queen Consort, who had dreamed of power, now faces the prospect of a quiet and undignified retirement. The final chapter of this story, as of this recording, is still unwritten, and it will be written not by historians or journalists, but by the family itself. Camilla's future remains uncertain, the king's relationship with his heir remains strained, and the monarchy remains in a state of transition that could take years to resolve. But one thing is certain, the midnight orders have changed the monarchy forever. William and Catherine have acted, and their actions have demonstrated that they are not content to wait for the succession. They are already shaping the institution, and they are doing so with confidence and conviction.
The future of the monarchy will be defined by their decisions, not by the traditions of the past. What we have witnessed is not just a change in personnel or a shift in administrative responsibility. It is a change in the very nature of the institution, a transformation that will echo through the centuries. The consort is no longer untouchable, no longer protected by the traditions of deference and duty. The heir is no longer passive, no longer content to wait in the wings while others make decisions that will affect the future of the monarchy. And the king is no longer alone in his decisions, no longer the sole authority in an institution that has always revered the sovereign's power. The monarchy has become a more collaborative institution, but it has also become a more divided one, a family torn between competing visions of its future. The question that remains is whether the monarchy can survive this new dynamic, whether the family can find a way to work together despite its deep divisions. The answer depends on the willingness of its members to put the institution ahead of their personal ambitions, to sacrifice their own desires for the good of the William and Catherine have shown that they are willing to do that they will act decisively when the institution is threatened, even if it means confronting those they love. Charles has shown that he is willing to do that, even when it means confronting his own wife and accepting a reality he never wanted to face. Camilla has not yet shown that she is willing to do that, and until she does, the monarchy will remain in a state of tension that could erupt at any moment. The midnight orders have been executed, the changes have been implemented, and the palace is now in a state of controlled transition. The old certainties are gone, swept away by the decisions made in the darkness of a quiet August night. The new order is still being written, shaped by the competing visions of the king, the heir, and the consort. But the monarchy will endure, as it always has, adapting to changing circumstances and emerging stronger from the challenges that threaten. It will do so in a new form, shaped by the decisions made on the night of August 24th, 2026, and it will carry the lessons of that night forward into an uncertain future. The final word belongs to history, and history is not written by those who wait. It is written by those who act, who seize the moment and shape the future with their decisions. William and Catherine have acted, and their actions will echo through the corridors of the monarchy for generations. They have demonstrated that the future of the institution is not something to be inherited passively, but something to be actively shaped and defended. The monarchy is not a birthright. It is a responsibility, and they have embraced that responsibility with courage and conviction. The night of August 24th will be remembered as the moment when the heirs became the leaders, and the monarchy was reborn. But the story does not end with the orders, as the days that followed would reveal. In the weeks after the midnight execution, a series of revelations emerged that painted an even more dramatic picture of what had really happened behind closed doors. Documents that had been kept from the public for years began to surface, leaking from the palace's internal archives with a regularity that suggested a coordinated campaign to shape the narrative. These documents told a story of ambition, manipulation, and a queen consort who had been planning her expansion of power for far longer than anyone had realized, working in secret to build an administrative empire that would survive even her removal from public duties. The documents, obtained by the Guardian through a Freedom of Information request that had been filed months earlier, included internal palace memos that detailed Camilla's efforts to expand her authority in painstaking detail. The memos dated back to 2024, shortly after the coronation, and they showed a systematic campaign to gain control over the monarchy's financial and administrative machinery. Camilla had wanted to appoint her own staff to key positions, bypassing the usual hiring procedures that had been in place for generations. She had wanted to review the budgets of other royal households, gaining insight into the financial operations of her rivals. And she had wanted to sit on the royal trustees, the body that oversees the monarchy's finances, a position that would have given her unprecedented power over the institution's resources. The king had initially resisted these demands, according to the memos, but he had gradually yielded to his wife's persistence, worn down by her constant appeals and her emotional pressure. Showed that Camilla had been patient, strategic, and relentless, pursuing her goals with a determination that bordered on obsession. She had worn down his resistance over time, using her influence and her emotional connection to him to achieve her goals, one small concession at a time. The palace, which had always prided itself on its ability to resist external pressure, had been unable to resist pressure from within, and the king had found himself making compromises that he would later regret. The memos also revealed that Camilla had been building alliances with senior courtiers who were sympathetic to her cause, cultivating relationships that would serve her interests in the years to come. She had cultivated relationships with the king's private secretary, the Lord Chamberlain, and the master of the household, all of whom had been persuaded that her expanded role was in the best interests of the monarchy. The alliances had been carefully constructed, with Camilla using her charm and her experience to win over even the most skeptical officials, offering them positions of influence in return for their loyalty. The network she had built was extensive and sophisticated, and it had been designed to survive even her removal from public duties. The documents painted a picture of a queen consort who was not content to be a figurehead, a woman who had never accepted the limitations of her role and who had spent years working to overcome them. She wanted power, and she had been willing to do whatever was necessary to get it, building alliances, cultivating relationships, and gradually expanding her authority. The revelation of these memos was a devastating blow to her reputation, confirming the worst suspicions of her critics and undermining the carefully constructed image of a grand motherly consort dedicated to charitable causes. The public, which had already been skeptical of her motives, now had proof that she had been scheming for years, and the proof was devastating. Anne, who had been aware of some of these efforts, had chosen not to intervene, believing that the king would eventually see through his wife's ambitions and the necessary steps to limit her authority. She had watched from the sidelines as Camilla built her network, trusting that the institution would eventually correct itself. But when it became clear that Charles was not going to act, that he was too emotionally invested in his wife to see her clearly, Anne had been forced to reconsider her position. The midnight orders were not just a reaction to Camilla's recent demands, they were the culmination of a long-standing conflict between those who wanted to protect the institution and those who wanted to reshape it, a conflict that had been building for years. The conflict between Camilla and the rest of the family had deep roots that stretched back decades. Anne had never approved of Camilla's relationship with Charles, and she had never fully accepted her as a member of the family, viewing her as an interloper who had disrupted the delicate balance of the household. Camilla, in turn, had resented Anne's authority and her closeness to the late queen, viewing her as a rival whose influence had to be overcome. The two women had maintained a fragile truce for years, but it had always been conditional, dependent on the careful management of their interactions. The midnight orders had shattered the truce, exposing the deep divisions that had always existed beneath the surface. The public reaction to the memos was swift and unforgiving, with Camilla's approval ratings dropping to record lows and the press turning against her with a ferocity that surprised even her critics. The press, which had been cautiously supportive of her role as queen consort, now portrayed her as a scheming manipulator who had betrayed the trust of the institution and the public. The narrative of the scheming queen, who had manipulated her way to the top and then tried to seize power she had not earned, was now firmly established, and it would be difficult to shake. Camilla had become the villain of the story, and the public was not inclined to forgive her. Camilla's allies attempted to fight back, leaking stories that portrayed her as a victim of palace intrigue, a woman who had been unfairly targeted by a ruthless heir and his ambitious wife. They claimed that the memos had been selectively leaked to damage her reputation, that the orders had been orchestrated by William and Catherine to marginalize the king's wife, and that the evidence had been taken out of context to make her look worse than she really was. The stories gained some traction among her supporters, but they were not enough to reverse the tide of public opinion. The public had seen the evidence, and they had made up their minds. The king, who had been trying to maintain a semblance of unity, was caught in the middle of a family war that showed no signs of ending. He loved his wife, but he could not defend her against the weight of the evidence that was being presented. He could not deny the memos, and he could not explain away the pattern of manipulation they revealed. He was left with the difficult task of balancing his personal loyalty with his institutional duty, and it was a task for which he was not well suited. The strain of the conflict was visible in his public appearances, and the public began to wonder whether he was capable of leading the institution through such a difficult period. The transition, which had been announced as a temporary measure, began to take on the appearance of permanence as the weeks passed. William and Catherine continued to assume more duties, and their office grew in size and authority, absorbing functions that had previously been managed by Camilla's staff. They were now the de facto heads of the royal household, exercising their authority with the efficiency that had always characterized their work. The palace, which had been in chaos in the immediate aftermath of the orders, began to stabilize under their leadership, and the staff began to adjust to the new reality. Camilla, by contrast, became increasingly marginalized, her influence waning with each passing week. She remained at Raymill House, making only occasional appearances at public events that had been carefully choreographed to minimize her exposure. Her staff were reduced, her budget was cut, and her influence was all but eliminated from the administrative functions of the household. She was still the Queen Consort, but she was no longer the power behind the throne. The midnight orders had achieved their goal. Camilla had been neutralized, and she was not coming back. The long-term implications of the orders were still unfolding, and they would shape the monarchy for generations to come. William and Catherine's elevation had established a new precedent that would be studied by constitutional historians for centuries, a precedent that defined the limits of the consort's role and the extent of the heir's authority. The consort's role would never be the same, as future consorts would now understand that their position was not guaranteed, and that they could be removed if they overstepped. The heir's role would never be the same, as future heirs would now understand that they could act decisively without waiting for the sovereign's approval. And the king's role would never be the same, as future sovereigns would now understand that their authority could be challenged by their own heirs. The public, for the most part, supported the orders and the transition that followed, according to opinion polls that showed strong approval for William and Catherine's actions. The public respected the Prince and Princess of Wales, and they trusted them to do what was best for the institution, viewing them as the guardians of the monarchy's future. They had been uneasy about Camilla's growing influence, and they were relieved to see it checked, believing that the institution needed to be protected from those who would use it for their own ends. The monarchy's approval ratings, which had declined during Camilla's power grab, began to recover, a sign that the public was ready to move forward. The palace, which had been in a state of chaos, began to function again, the staff adjusting to the new leadership with the professionalism that had always characterized the royal household. The staff, who had been divided by the conflict, started to come together, recognizing that the institution needed to be unified to survive. The transition, which had been painful and divisive, was also necessary, a reckoning that had been long overdue. It had exposed the weaknesses in the monarchy's governance structure, and it had forced a conversation about the future of the institution that would have been impossible without the crisis. The final chapter of this story, as of this recording, is still unwritten, and it will be shaped by the decisions that are made in the coming months and years. Camilla has not given up, and she has not accepted her fate, still believing that she can regain the influence she has lost. She is still the Queen Consort, and she still has the King's ear, able to influence his decisions even from her position on the margins. But she no longer has the power she once had, and the balance has shifted decisively against. The midnight orders have changed the balance of forces within the family, and the balance is no longer in her favour. William and Catherine, meanwhile, have emerged as the unlikely heroes of the crisis, their reputations enhanced by their decisive action. They have always been the most dedicated and least self-serving members of the royal family, never seeking power for its own sake and always seeking to serve. And in this crisis, they have served the institution with distinction, demonstrating that they are willing to make difficult decisions for the good of the monarchy. The Prince and Princess of Wales, who were once seen as the future of the monarchy, have become the steady hand that guides it through its darkest hours. William has emerged with his reputation enhanced, the driving force behind the orders who acted without seeking credit. He understood that the monarchy needed to be stabilized, and he acted accordingly, demonstrating the leadership qualities that will define his reign. His relationship with his father has been strained by the orders, but it has also been clarified, with both men now understanding the limits of their authority and the responsibilities they bear. Charles now knows that William will not hesitate to act when the institution is threatened, and William now knows that his father will eventually yield to the demands of duty, even when it means accepting decisions he did not make. The monarchy has survived the crisis, but it has been changed by it, transformed in ways that will take years to fully understand. The old certainties are gone, replaced by a new order that is still being written. The only thing that is certain is that the monarchy will never be quite the same, shaped by the revelations that have exposed the fractures beneath the surface and forced the family to confront them. The family will continue to evolve, and the institution will continue to adapt, but the events of August 2026 will be remembered as a turning point. What we have witnessed is not just a change in personnel or a shift in administrative responsibility. It is a change in the very nature of the institution, a transformation that will echo through the centuries. The consort is no longer untouchable, and the heir is no longer passive. The king is no longer alone in his decisions, and the family is no longer united. The monarchy has become a more collaborative institution, but it has also become a more divided one, and the divisions will shape its future for generations to come. The question that remains is whether the monarchy can survive this new dynamic, whether the family can find a way to work together despite its deep divisions. The answer depends on the willingness of its members to put the institution ahead of their personal ambitions, to sacrifice their own desires for the good of the whole. William and Catherine have shown that they are willing to do that, and Charles has shown that he is willing to do that. Camilla has not yet shown that she is willing to do that, and until she does, the monarchy will remain in a state of tension that could erupt at any moment. The midnight orders have been executed, the changes have been implemented, and the palace is now in a state of controlled transition. The old certainties are gone, and the new order is still being written. But the monarchy will endure, as it always has, adapting to changing circumstances and emerging stronger from the challenges that threaten it. It will do so in a new form, shaped by the decisions made on the night of August 24th, 2026, and it will carry the lessons of that night forward into an uncertain future. What we have learned from this crisis is that the monarchy is stronger than any one individual, but also more fragile than we ever imagined. It can survive a scandal, but it cannot survive a permanent division, and the divisions that have been exposed will take years to heal. The orders have averted a crisis, but they have not solved the underlying tensions, and those tensions will continue to shape the monarchy for years to come. The palace is in a state of transition, and the family is in a state of conflict. The future is uncertain, but it is also full of possibility. The final word belongs to history, and history is not written by those who wait. It is written by those who act, who seize the moment and shape the future with their decisions. William and Catherine have acted, and their actions will echo through the corridors of the monarchy for generations. They have demonstrated that the future of the institution is not something to be inherited passively, but something to be actively shaped and defended. The monarchy is not a birthright, it is a responsibility, and they have embraced that responsibility with courage and conviction. The palace doctors called the emergency meeting. The king delivered his unexpected decree, and William and Catherine executed their midnight orders. The monarchy will never be the same, but it will survive as it always has. The old order is gone, and the new order is still being written. The family is divided, but the institution endures. And in the end, that is all that matters. What we have witnessed is a moment of profound change, a moment that will be studied by historians for generations to come. The monarchy is being reshaped before our eyes, transformed by the decisions of those who lead it. The old certainties are gone, and the new order is still being written, but the direction is clear. The monarchy is moving toward a more collaborative, more transparent future, and the leaders of that future are William and Catherine. The final word belongs to history, and history is not kind to those who hesitate. William and Catherine have not hesitated, and they have acted with the conviction that the monarchy must endure. Their actions will be remembered as the moment when the heirs became the leaders and the monarchy was reborn. The night of August 24th, 2026 will be remembered as the night that changed everything, the night when the future of the monarchy was decided in the middle of the night. The palace is in a state of transition, the king is stunned, Camilla is marginalized, and William and Catherine are now the driving force behind the monarchy. The old order is gone, and the new order is here. It was written in the middle of the night on a quiet August evening that changed everything. The monarchy will never be the same, but it will survive, and it will thrive. The future is uncertain, but it is also full of promise. The final word belongs to history, and history is not written by those who keep secrets. It is written by those who are willing to act, who are willing to make difficult decisions for the good of the institution. William and Catherine have acted, and their actions will echo through the corridors of the monarchy for generations. They have shown that they are ready to lead, and the monarchy is ready to follow.